and welcome to this Python tutorial about creating a window that has buttons on it. If I drag my terminal onto the screen and press one of the buttons, you will see that button 1 appears, button 2 appears, button 3 appears, button 2, button 1. This is a good starting point for developing your own software. Let's get into the code for making something that looks like this. The first thing that I'm going to do is import tkinter.messageBox, as well as importing tkinter entirely. So I'm actually going to say from tkinter import everything. I'm going to make a class called window. I'm going to define two properties. The first is going to be called tk instance. Sorry for the arbitrary name, but it will make sense in just a moment. We will also have a frame for the buttons. I'm going to set that equal to none. These will be set later in the code. Now let's make an initializer. We'll pass in the keyword self and do some initializing. So here we are going to set the property tkinstance equal to an instance of the tk class. Next, we are going to ensure that the button frame is still set to none. And then I'm going to call a function called self.setup. Now we just need to implement this setup function. Within this setup function, there will be some other functions that will be called, but there are two lines that don't rely on other functions that we have to write, and those two lines are self.tkinstance.title, and we also are going to write self.tkinstance.main loop. This line is necessary to see the window. Okay, so we'll also need to define two other functions, self.setup button frame and self.setup buttons. Let's define those functions. Setup button frame, and we need this keyword self since we're doing object-oriented programming with a class. The other function is called setup buttons self, and we need that def. Keyword, I'm going to say pass for just a moment. Now I'm going to implement this setup button frame function. So let's do self.button frame, and we can say tkinter.frame of tk instance. And now we do self.buttonFrame.pack side equals bottom. So the buttons are going to appear at the bottom of the window. Self.buttonFrame.column configure. So this will arrange these buttons into 3 different columns because I'm going to write this line 3 times. So column configure 1, self.buttonFrame column configure 2. So we have 3 columns for these buttons, and that's all the code we need for the button frame. That is done, and now we just need to set up the buttons. We can make button 1 equal to a button self dot button frame. So we need the frame, which we just configured here. What is the button frame? It's a frame object. That's why it's a capital F. That's how this is the instantiation of the frame. And then we call these 4 functions on the frame. Anyways, back to the setup buttons function. The next thing is to set the text for the buttons, because the buttons need some text. And just call this button 1. And when we press a button, we want something to happen. So the way you do that is with a command, and you do self dot button 1 pressed. But this is just the name of a function that I'm going to define, so that I don't get any errors. I need to make sure that this function is defined. I need to make sure that the self keyword is there. I'm going to copy and paste this 3 times. The only thing I'm going to change is the button number, because I'm going to have button 1, button 2, and button 3. Now let's do something with a grid. We're going to say button 1 dot grid row equals 0, column equals 0. So if you think about a grid, you have rows and columns, and so this makes sense. This is the first row and the first column. So you could probably guess where the second button is going to be located based on where the buttons were when I showed the window at the beginning of this video. So let you think about that while I repeat this code. I probably just shouldn't retype it. I should just copy and paste it. So I'm going to say button 2, what changes? The text of the button will change, the function that's called will change. This is the function that's called when the button is pressed, and the position of the button on the window is going to change. The row is going to stay the same, but the column is going to increment by 1. Let's do the same thing for the third button. So we have button 3, we have the same frame, different text for the button, a different function, change the name already, and we're going to increment the column to column 2. Okay, so all that's left, remarkably, is to just implement these functions, which consists of print statements like button 1. So when you press button 1, something happens. So you can test the basic functionality of a button. All right, so this is just the definition of a class. So if I run this function, if I run this file, sorry, nothing's going to happen. So I need to instantiate this. And that's all that needs to be done in order to get the window to appear. So now I'm going to run this, and we're going to see what happens and change a few things so that we can understand what these lines of code are actually doing. Python 3.12, and I called it navigation for no apparent reason. And here is the GUI. I can change the size of the window, dynamically during runtime. And if I press button 1 and button 2 and button 3, you can see the print statements that were coded. If I press the X, the GUI disappears and the program ends. Let's see what happens when we delete this import statement. Do we get an error? Because we imported everything from Tkinter, so why do we need that import statement at the top as well? It says that Tkinter is not defined if I don't include that. So what happens when I comment out this line? It says that TK is not defined, which is that instance here. So it looks like we need both of those, interestingly. I was going to change bottom to top. So let's see if we can move the buttons. Okay, so it looks the same, obviously, because the whole window originally is squished, but we moved the buttons to the top. You can also add more buttons than just one row of buttons. You can add you can add more buttons so that you have more rows. If anyone has any questions about this code, let me know. Thanks for watching.